that?
I said you invited,
kindly
invited me to come and speak at my own conference.
Yeah,
It was
so anyway, I had I was working in New York as a journalist. I was writing for the New York Times Magazine and Esquire and other places. And but I'd come from a more kind of artistic, bohemian background. And I began to feel in my late 20s extremely depressed by the media, by the inability to get like really important subjects taken seriously. And I really didn't even, kind of fully understand at that point, the mechanisms around that. I just knew that like stuff that, I really cared about and learned about as being really essential. There was no very little access to the mainstream media with that kind of material. So at that point I went through like a whole self-searching process. I had like a spiritual crisis, and for me, that crisis led to an exploration of shamanism and indigenous cultures. Led me to West Africa. I went through tribal initiation with the tribe there. I visited the Amazon and worked with sacred medicine from the Amazon that's known as ayahuasca. I visited the Mazatec Indians in Mexico. And anyway, so I wrote a first book, Breaking Up in the Head, as my own value system went through a transformation, and my belief system went through a transformation, where I kind of opened to the knowledge of indigenous people and their spiritual traditions through direct experience of shamanism, other altered states of consciousness, and so on. And those experiences then led me to look at what all these indigenous cultures are saying about the time that we're in now. There's definitely a sense that these cultures understand this time that we're in as a time of prophecy. That they say that they're that they inherited traditions going way back, that there would be this time. And they have, a sense of where we're at in this process. I'm speaking particularly about the Hopi and, the Maya, but apparently this is also the case with the Inca and the Kogi and other people. The Hopi talk about us being on the transition between the fourth world and the fifth world. The Mesoamerican cultures talk about the sun and the age of the sixth sun. So I then spent 5 years writing my second book, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl, where I really tried to understand, was there validity to this idea, and what would it mean for our time. And what I ended up, coming to an understanding of was that, we were in kind of like a certain form of consciousness, a certain way of approaching reality. And that form of consciousness is of necessity, coming to an end as we go through the end of this cycle. I think what we're discussing here in this conference, is one crucial aspect of that transformation, which is this kind of, we lived in a very material-driven culture that has been sort of structurally ruled by a certain form of money that's been very much about promoting the individual, the personal ego gratification, and so on. And my sense is that the time for that is reaching its end and its limit. And it's as a lot of these cultures talk about, it's probably going to be very, very difficult transition in the next period. I think all of us here are aware of, stepping aside from what indigenous people, know or don't know, I think all of us here are aware of, the global ecological crisis that we're in, that we're seeing, a massive species extinction crisis where scientists talk about 25% of all mammalian species, potentially all species in general, being extinct in 30 years if we continue at present rates of industrialization and so on. All tropical forests gone in 40 years. The fish are, 90% of the large fish are gone from the oceans right now, which is leading to, collapses of, entire ecosystems of aquatic life, et cetera, et cetera. Climate change is, accelerating, which is leading to a kind of reduction in arable land, potentially leading to massive food shortages. Somehow the world is still holding together to a certain extent. However, unless there's a kind of a deeper change in our underlying way of being, we're not going to survive effectively as a species. And you have scientists like James Lovelock, who came up with the Gaia hypothesis, who now says that if continuing, if he looks at projections of what's happening, there'll be 150 million people on the Earth alive at the end of the century. He's one very esteemed and respected, no joker. So when I finished writing 2012, and I kind of absorbed all this information, I felt that it was no longer enough simply to be a journalist or a writer. I wanted to figure out how I could participate in a process of global transformation. And I looked at my own skill set, and my skills are communication, media, networking to a certain extent, and I'd also begun to, from writing the books, I began to get tons of emails from people who had like amazing stories to share and ideas to share, and there was really no cultural filter that would allow them to get those ideas out. So that led me ultimately to start this web magazine, Reality Sandwich. I've never been a businessman. It was never my intention to be a businessman. I always wanted to be an artist. I think that the books are art. And I try to see the whole project that I'm engaged in as a social, what Joseph Beuys called a social sculpture, in a way. So in a way, I think Reality Sandwich has been very effective. We now get 75,000 people a month. The name was a kind of off-the-cuff idea that I had with my business partner, and I've kind of regretted it ever since. But then you start something, and it's too far down the path to change, because I think it's actually a fairly serious website, and we get hundreds of comments. We introduced Charles Eisenstein's work to a lot of people, introduced him to Chris and so on. So we can scan the terrain for people who are really developing important concepts, and for us really creating a full spectrum kind of alternative paradigm. So looking at visionary technologies, sustainability, alternative economic models, but then also for me just as serious is the psychic dimensions, the dimensions of consciousness. I feel that that the shift that we're engaged in, is not just about shifting from one material paradigm to the next. It's actually a different understanding of the nature of consciousness and the nature of being, and that actually we're going to reintegrate a lot of the spiritual understanding that shamanic cultures have, that Eastern cultures have, and I think this has been happening as an underground process. I'm actually simultaneously at this conference called Science and Non-Duality, which is over in San Rafael, and there I'm really still thinking about what does it mean as people embrace non-dualism. What is that? Where does that interact with a new social paradigm or a new or sustainability or ecological progress? So with Reality Sandwich, we found that there was a tremendously active community of people who were engaged in it and who really wanted to find each other. And so that led us to launch a social network, evolver.net, which we've now launched.